I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My family doesn't really have roots in Albuquerque. I do have a grandpa who grew up in a really small farming community in southern New Mexico, but neither of my parents were raised in New Mexico. They both grew up elsewhere in the United States. My parents moved to Albuquerque for my dad's career, so I was born there and I spent the first 18 years of my life there. We lived on the west side of the city, which was pretty empty when my parents first moved there, but it grew over time and was a pretty sizable suburban area by the time that I was born. After I graduated from high school in Albuquerque, I moved up to Provo, Utah, where I went to college. My parents and most of my siblings went to college there, so it was a tradition that had kind of been ingrained in me. I didn't think about it much. It was just a given that I would go to school in Utah. My mom and I would drive to Utah a lot when I was growing up to visit family there, so I was familiar with the area. So a few days before the semester started, my mom drove with me up to Provo and helped me move into the dorms. And then I was just on my own going to school. My older sister lived about an hour away, so I got to see her sometimes, which was nice. And also, while living in Utah, I met my now husband. He grew up in Arizona in the Phoenix area, but he also moved to Utah for school. So he and I met. We lived in a little apartment in Provo, working and going to school for a couple years. After I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I got a job up in Salt Lake City and spent a couple years commuting from Provo because my husband was still working on his degree. And then one summer, my husband got an internship up north, so we moved up to North Salt Lake while my husband did his internship so that we wouldn't be commuting so far. But then we moved back to Provo in the fall for the next school year. After my husband graduated, he was offered a full-time job in Utah and also an internship in Texas. And we decided to take a chance on the internship, so we packed up all our stuff and moved to Waco, Texas. We drove there, stopping in Albuquerque along the way to visit my parents. And we lived in Waco for about 6 months while my husband completed his internship. My manager at my job back in Salt Lake arranged for me to continue working remotely after I moved away, which gave my husband and I the flexibility to move wherever we needed to for his career without totally disrupting my career. While we were in Waco, we got a little 10-week-old puppy. He was born in a farm in Belton, Texas, and we love him. He was the best thing that came out of our time in Texas. And also, while we lived in Waco, we got to visit my husband's sisters in Houston a few times, so it was nice to be closer to them. But after 6 months in Waco, my husband got a full-time job offer in California, so we packed up our stuff and drove halfway across the country again. We left Waco really late in the day, like 2 or 3 p.m., so we ended up driving really late at night trying to get to Albuquerque, where we planned to stay for a few days before continuing on to California. And I just remember spending hours driving in the dark along this 2-lane highway somewhere in western Texas. My husband was driving his own car ahead of me, so it was just me and our dog in my car, and I had nothing to look at except the taillights from my husband in front of me, and it felt like I was driving through this never-ending dark tunnel that just went on for eternity. But eventually the drive did end. We made it to Albuquerque, where we stayed for a week, and then we continued on to California. And I had never driven to California before, so the agricultural checkpoint on the border with Arizona really surprised me, although I only had to stop that first time. Every other time I've driven through, it's been closed, so I usually just drive straight through into California without stopping. Anyway, we made it to California. We spent a couple weeks in an Airbnb while we looked for an apartment, and then we found our current place in LA County, and we've lived there ever since. We didn't know anyone in the area when we moved here, which was a challenge, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit and made that problem even worse. But we're finally, after a few years, starting to feel at home in California. And when COVID started to subside a little, I began working on a master's degree, so now I make the drive out to Fullerton a couple times a week for school. But overall, we really like the LA area, and we plan to stay for this foreseeable future, depending on where our careers take us.